the last presentation.
Now we switch the topic from peer effect to grading standard. This is a joint project, as you can understand, with Morris. And maybe some of you are not familiar with the term grading standard. For grading standard, we define in plain words how much a teacher is generous or not in assessing students. And we chose to investigate a bit more this topic because sometimes in Italy there is a evergreen debate about the gap between teacher marks and test scores using INVALSI test scores. Actually, some claims came from the comparison between the final high school exam and INVALSI test at regional or province level. Our aims in this research note is to update to update what we know about the grading standard with a territorial perspective, where for territorial we mean province as a unit of analysis, and we want to start to explore something about behind this divide. So why we observe this gap between test score, teacher marks, and this divide between North and South. So, as I mentioned before, grading standard reflect the ability level needed by students in a specific task in order to get a given grade. There is a large literature about the fact that some teachers are more generous than others in assessing students. This can depend on many factors, and what for us is interesting is create a sort of index of stringency. How much is a teacher strict in evaluating students or not? Of course, we know that grading standards is based on assessment process. So teachers take into account not only the competence of the students, because this is the aim of the teacher mark in Italy, or maybe we can discuss in other countries, but so it's not only the competence, but also the effort, the motivation, perseverance. These are just 4 characteristics of the student that, according to ACD, are dimensions taken into account by the multifaceted assessment process. What happens is that across, we can imagine not only that there is variation between provinces, but also let's think to schools within classrooms within the same schools, that teachers have their teacher proclivities. They have their proclivities, their idea about how to evaluate students. So even if a school principal can set up a sort of policy at school level, there is always a sort of human factor. And what happens that, in general, it's important that also the teacher and students interact. So teacher and students interact, and the grading policy of a classroom can depend also on this interaction. What is relevant for the Italian debate, but also to other debate in other countries, I think to United States, that invest more about the understanding of the grading inflation, is that if we are very generous, this works not only in the school setting under 18 years old, but also at university level. So if we are very generous in terms of assessing students, the hypothetical problem is that there is less signaling power of the teacher marks. In principle, the teacher marks should work as a signaling factor in the way that say, okay, these students are very good compared to other or not. So the consequences are not only at macro system, but at the general level and national level, but also if we adopt an individual perspective. If I'm exposed to very generous teacher marks, maybe I can start to think that the teacher treat people in the same way, and maybe I think that I am more competent than others, but I have the same teacher marks. So this can trigger some social emotional skills, soft skills, reducing motivation or effort towards school. The same is, there is also the social comparison perspective. If I take into account that all my peers are treated in the same way, there are also some negative side effects on the comparison process within the classroom. I think that my peers, they don't work in the same way like me. I start to say, okay, maybe I behave like them. What we know about the grading standards in Italy, we know that there are some geographical differences in grading standards. There is in 2015 one contribution about differences between macro area and provincial level. This, as I said before, it works also not only for the school setting, so it's not a problem of teacher, it's not a problem in the mandatory schooling, but also at university level. We know that there are some trends over time of grading inflation. It doesn't work only in Italy, but also in other countries. Let's think to the United States, United Kingdom, a big country. What I think about the plausible issue when we measure grading standard are main three. The first one is that sometimes the last year that not only in Italian literature but also in other literature that cover other countries, United States mainly and United Kingdom, I think that there is a sort of misleading equation not faithful to the data generating process. So the fact that in most of cases they regress test on mark and not the opposite. I will go more in detail in a minute. Then the second problem is the simultaneity. And this depends, in measurement of grades, teacher marks, and test scores. This critically depends on the institutional setting. INVALSI has their own collection policy. Other European countries collect, for instance, the standardized test at the beginning as entry test, some at the last, at the end of the year. And the third problem is what do we control for? So the trade-off between under over controlling for some characteristic at individual or geographical level. So this is the first issue, more in detail. So most of the previous literature use the following equation: test on GPA using province fixed effect, for instance. If you want to measure the gap between the test and GPA at province level. What I do here is to do our updates, change the right and the left side. I want to regress GPA on test score. This is not a trivial solution just to show off, but it's important because if you have on the other side test score, you can adopt some solution to solve what is another problem that I explain in a minute about the measurement and error in the test score. Of course, the assumption behind this literature is that test score is a proxy of students' abilities. And this is consciously, unconsciously, a basic assumption behind most of the literature in economics and sociology of education. The idea that some test score more or less are a good proxy not only of the skills, competence, but also to a certain extent also on social-emotional skills. This is the second problem about the simultaneity. This is a little graph to show you the fact that, for instance, let's think to the lower secondary schools, middle schools. We have 3 years, first, second, third year, and let's imagine that we collect the standardized test every year, and also we collect the GPA. Of course, over time, there is they influence each other, because the fact that a student is exposed to a teacher effect, a teacher can influence the GPA, can influence my behavior, can influence my effort and my test score. What in literature we call Pygmalion effect or Golem effect, depending on the perspective. The problem is important, I think, that in INVALSI, that if I estimate the test score, GPA on test score, for instance, in the 8th grade, I have the problem that I have a test score that is the result of 2 years of exposure to a teacher. I don't have the ideal solution, of course, so what I do is just at the moment to instrument the standardized test in the 8th grade with the standardized test of some years before. Why I chose middle schools? Because middle schools, given the Italian institutional setting with INVALSI, is the only educational level in where you can use a previous standardized test of another educational cycle. So with exposure by law to another set of teachers. And also exploit the fact that there is also a bit of resorting between elementary and lower secondary schools, not only on the teacher side, but only on student side. Then the final problem is about the adjustment set. For which variable should we control? Because in principle, if we want to measure a gap between two variables, we also could say, okay, I regress these two variables, I save the estimate, I say that these are proxy of a grading standard. But what I do here is to adjust for some socio-demographic information collected always 3 years before in the 5th grade, gender, ethnic, and socio-economic background. And the most important variable in this setting is the ability at the provincial level. So I adjust in a stepwise approach, one by one, these characteristics at provincial level, so the share of gender of students, the share of female at province level, the average score of socioeconomic background, the share of non-natives, and then the average score of ability, minus ego, so minus the individual. The idea behind this approach is that the grading policy, the grading standard in the lower secondary schools can depend on the average ability of the province. So let's imagine that we have incoming course of students, and it's reasonable to think that the teachers can adjust their grading standard taking into account the ability of the students. This is our setting that, as you can see, is similar to what happened before, just without Norway. So I use standardized test in 8th grade with GPA in 8th grade, and then as an instrumental variable the test score in the 5th grade, both for mathematics and language, separated analysis. Here are a recap of the data set. So I have what is maybe different from the previous contribution is that I set up a panel data set, so I am able to follow students from the 5th grade to 8th grade, actually the same data set of Norwegian presentation. So around about 1 million of students in 3 courses. Something that maybe already mentioned, you got them. The outcomes is GPA in math and language, the average of oral and written examinations. The variable of interest is standardized test in math and in language. The individual adjustment, gender, socioeconomic origin, ethnic background at individual level. I do some robustness check with previous standardized test, and then the adjustment set at provincial level. Share of gender, average socioeconomic origin, share of ethnic background, non-natives, and then average standardized test. The analytical strategy is quite simple. 3 equations that sum up what I said so far in terms of, so the first equation is a classic equation ordinary square, GPA on test score with province fixed effect, and one equation, one map. So the B, the second equation with the instrumental variable, as you can see, the test score, and then an instrument with the test score collected, -3. And the last one is about the adjustment set with the correction, so adjustment with the socio-demographic characteristic at individual and provincial level. How, just it's important how I manipulate the grading standards. So I have an estimate. What I do is normalize between 0 and 100 just to make more easy the interpretation, the visualization of the result of the map. Just for that maps that in some minutes I will show you. And then I created 3 levels. We can discuss about how many levels you can create, 3, 5, but I can anticipate that the results are robust to this visual manipulation, let's say. Just before the main analysis, just a brief recap about the divide at provincial level in Italy between north and south. So here I just show you a sort of, so I run the average test score in mathematics and language in each province with 3 levels. Always I normalize them again in 3 levels, white, orange, and red area. As you can see, okay, maybe most of us know that there is a divide between the north and south in terms of test score, language, and mathematics. Here I show you the first result about the language. So, 3 maps that refer to the 3 models. Basic model with ordinary square, GPA on test. The second one is the correction for the simultaneity with the previous instrumental variable. The last one is the adjustment set. As you can see, okay, in the first graph you see that there is some areas in the north and the south fell in the red area. So darker is the color, stricter is the grading standard. This is the interpretation of the color of the map. So as you can see, there are some provinces in the center and the north that show very strict grading standard compared to others. When I do in the second graph the correction with the instrumental variable, there are some slightly change. Some provinces change color, but there isn't a relevant switch. What happens in terms of switch? So what is the relevant switch happens in the last map when I adjust for the socio-demographic characteristics. It's important to say that among these socio-demographic characteristics, the relevant characteristics is the ability collected 3 years before. So when I include one by one socioeconomic, gender, or ethnicity, socioeconomic origin, the map doesn't change, even if we manipulate the the level of the course from 3 to 5. What happens is that when I introduce ability, there are some changes, as you can see, for instance, in Sicily, in south of Calabria, or Sardinia. This switch is more relevant when we look at mathematics. So here I show you the mapping, the 3 maps in mathematics, and it's the same setting, the same interpretation rules. So in the first graph you can see that there is a divide between north and south, but the relevant change is when I introduce the instrumental variable to correct simultaneity, but the main change is the adjustment set. So some areas in the south of Italy have a switch from white or yellow-orange color to red one. So what does it mean? So the idea is that when I control for the average ability of incoming course, it looks like that it came out that South provinces are not generous. I think that it implies that actually it's not a problem about some teacher, let's say, stereotype or policies about how to evaluate students. It's something about the stock of the students that arrive in the lower middle school, in this case, so the transition between elementary schools and lower secondary schools. And in principle, there are many explanations of this flow, let's say. It can depend, of course, on what happened before, of course, in the school setting at the elementary level in the south compared to the north. It depends on the infrastructure. We know that in the south we have less infrastructure compared to the north, but I think that it's, of course, since I look at characteristics at province level, it's not just a matter of schooling. It involves many actors within the province. This is a short recap about that there are differences of grading standard, but this difference do not appear anymore in terms of huge geographical divide when we adjust for the ability of incoming course. These are the next steps. So some ideas about a better explanation of what happens, the teacher supply, so how is structured this teacher supply between North and South, and the quality of this teacher, of this teaching in each province, and it's feasible to build some indicator at province level aggregating data. That's it.
Thank you very much.